Good evening, everyone. We're working on our pilgrimage.
This meeting is being recorded.
We're working on our pilgrimage to Israel through the Holy Land. I was just thinking about how long we thought this would be when we started, which I had a sneaking suspicion it would be longer. So we're up to class 15, and we're back on our monthly schedule. We had a 3-week gap here, just because of the timing of Swami's birthday and his Moksha Day. But now we're back to our first and third Wednesday of the month, and it's very nice to be with you. So let's start with the prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dearest friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel the power of the life of Christ through all the dramatic events of his incarnation, through the powerful love and dedication to God which characterized every action and every thought and every feeling that ran through him. Show us what our true potential is, and then give us the clarity, the self-control, the wisdom, the love, that we may follow in the footsteps of the great ones and realize ourselves as they have done, as one with thee. Om. Peace. Amen. All right, my friends, I think we're going to start with the beautiful song Swami Kriyananda singing, I Have Been Roaming. It's also called sometimes Divine Love Sorrows. This was words that Master put to a violin piece, the melody of a violin piece. In the early days with Ananda, when we didn't have a choir and we didn't have ensemble groups, we really just had Swami and his music. He would often just bring his guitar and then say, what would you like me to sing? And whenever I had a chance, I would always ask him to sing this song. So it's a particularly poignant one.
I have been roaming, I have been roaming, forsaken by thee, who hast seen me groping, hardly ever answering. I shall be roaming, roaming, I shall be roaming, roaming, bursting all boundaries of heart, evermore moving towards thee, to thy vast unthrobbing heart. Through endless incarnations, I've called out for thy name. Through endless incarnations, I've called out for thy name. Searching by the streamlets of all my silvery dreams, I have been roaming, I have been roaming, forsaken by thee, who hast seen me groping, hardly ever answering. I shall be roaming, roaming, I shall be roaming, roaming, bursting all boundaries of heart, evermore moving towards thee, to thy vast unthrobbing heart. Through endless incarnations, I've called out for thy name. Through endless incarnations, I've called out for thy name. Searching by the streamlets of all my silvery dreams, through endless incarnations, I've called out for thy name. Through endless incarnations, I've called out for thy name. Searching by the streamlets of all my silvery dreams, I have been roaming, I have been roaming, forsaken by thee, who hast seen me groping, hardly ever answering. I shall be roaming, roaming, I shall be roaming, roaming, bursting all boundaries of heart, evermore moving towards thee, to thy vast unthrobbing heart. Through endless incarnations, I've called out for thy name. Through endless incarnations, I've called out for thy name. Searching by the streamlets of all my silvery dreams, searching by the streamlets of all my silvery dreams, I have been roaming, I have been roaming, forsaken by thee, who hast seen me groping, hardly ever answering. I shall be roaming, roaming, I shall be roaming, roaming, bursting all boundaries of heart, evermore moving towards thee, to thy vast unthrobbing heart. Through endless incarnations, I've called out for thy name. Through endless incarnations, I've called out for thy name. Searching by the streamlets of all my silvery dreams, searching by the streamlets of all my silvery dreams.
That was a nice beginning. I hope you agree. So where we are now in the story of Jesus is the last class we had. Jesus was arrested. And so now we move into the real, the closing drama, which goes on for a while, because all the events of these last 3 days leading to his resurrection are, of course, quite startlingly moving. So what happens is, now, Jesus has been seized by this armed cohort, and he's being arraigned and arrested at the behest of the priests. And so the high priest for the 10 years previous to this moment is Annas. And Annas is the leader of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is 71 elders the Jewish elders, the teachers of the law, the priests. I don't know the details of the description, but they're the council that govern all the people, the Supreme Council, the Supreme Court, they're called. And of those, Annas was the high priest for 10 years. And now, interestingly, the high priest is his son-in-law, which also gives you an idea of what the politics of the situation were at that time. So perhaps it's possible that Annas' closest male relative was in fact the most highly qualified person, or it's possible that the priesthood had been corrupt and was beginning to hold its power in a dynastic manner. So his son-in-law was Caiaphas, and Caiaphas was now the high priest. These things are referred to in the Bible, which I'll read in a moment. And many of the Sanhedrin know that this arrest is going to take place, and they gather at Caiaphas' house, and it's late at night, because this was after the Last Supper. Jesus went with his disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane, where he often took them. He was staying up late and praying over this rock that they now call the rock of the agony of Christ. And then in the dark of the night, Judas came with the armed cohort, and Jesus was taken into custody. So the drama begins to happen over the middle of the night, leading up to the time when the rooster crows to signal the dawn. That's significant because you remember at the Last Supper, when Jesus was telling them that he was going to a place that they couldn't go with him, Peter vigorously swore that wherever Jesus went, he would go with him. And Jesus says, really? 3 times before the dawn comes, before the cock crows and signals the dawn, you will say that you don't even know me. And that is exactly what takes place, as we'll read here in the Bible, in this tumultuous hours over the middle of the night, where Jesus has been seized and taken first to the house of Annas and then to the house of Caiaphas. By the time their Caiaphas' word has gone out and others of the elders have gathered, and they begin to interrogate Jesus and to try to get him to testify in such a way that he will condemn himself. And then when the dawn comes, all 71 of the Sanhedrin leaders are called together to vote as to whether to follow their own laws and condemn Jesus to death for absolute blasphemy, for claiming to be one with the Son of God. And in the midst of all of that, Peter, in fact, fulfills Jesus' prophecy about him, and 3 times in the chaos and the fear of the moment. Now you have to also understand that the disciples are panicked because, yes, Jesus has been baiting the priests all this time, and yes, he has been skating right at the edge of blasphemy, but they have so much experience of the power of Jesus that they never imagined that Jesus would allow himself to be taken. And this, of course, was the dilemma of Judas that we talked about last time, that Judas was hoping to force the confrontation in which Jesus would declare himself. And instead, when Jesus allows himself to be arrested and taken away, Judas suddenly comes out of this delusion that he's been operating under, and he becomes so remorseful that even that very night he kills himself, because he realizes that he's handed his master over to this tribunal, which is now going to execute him. He didn't wait for Jesus to be executed before Judas took matters into his own hand. So now, this is where we are, and we have several pages of the Bible to read. And again, I remind you that when I'm reading this combined, multiple Gospels, so occasionally there's an overlap, but I've tried to keep it as simple as I can. So they bound Jesus and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Now it's interesting because you see Annas is still holding the power. They bring him first to Annas. So I say all this because it helps us to really understand what the dynamic really was. Oh, there was more I wanted to say. Because we often talk about the Jews, but all of the supporters of Jesus were also Jews. All of the Essene community in which Jesus was born and raised, all of these people were Jews. So it wasn't really the Jews that condemned him. It was this corrupt priesthood who rightly recognized in Jesus the ultimate threat to their power, because their power was the power of worldly authority, really, even though it was operating in a religious context. It was wealth, and it was inherited position, and it was the position they had put themselves in, where they were the intermediary between the devotee and God. Their interpretation of the law would determine whether or not someone was pleasing in the sight of God. And a religion becomes institutionalized, not when it becomes organized, but when its own officers, when the institution itself appoints authorities that now are the necessary intermediary between the devotee and God. And then the institution becomes required for salvation. Adherence to its laws becomes required for salvation. And that in itself is false. It's just simply a falsehood. So Jesus came, preached to everybody, disregarded the laws, drove the money changers from the temple. He was awakening people to their own direct relationship with God. He spoke of God as the Father. He talked about sending the Comforter. And the priests were completely left out of the equation, absolutely just simply eliminated. What would happen to their power? What would happen to their position? And because Jesus carried with him the vibration of divinity, and because in the presence of Christ, those who were attuned, which were many, many, could feel his power, then why would they go to the priests? They would go directly to Christ, and they would go directly by the methods he taught. Now, Master tells us that Jesus taught his disciples to do Kriya. It's not much listed in the Bible, but he did. He taught them to commune directly with God. And what is the most important commandment? Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, mind, and strength. Again, you don't need a priest to be able to do this. So worldly power in religious guise was actually what was opposed to Jesus. And this is what is happening here. There are stories told, the visions of Anne Catherine Emmerich, some of the writings of Edgar Casey, other places where it is said that this group of priests brought in a sort of drunken mob. And so when you hear here that the people were crying, crucify him, free the brigand Barabbas, don't free Jesus. According to these sources, the priests had stuffed the room with people who they were plying with drink and giving money to, in order to persuade the authorities that this is what the people wanted. It was not an authentic uprising on the part of the people. It was all mastermind with those with power. Now this is all very depressing, but it's also a more realistic picture of what really happened. And in our own time, very recently, we've seen that mobs can be incited to do all sorts of things. And so, and people who know how to manipulate mobs know how to incite them to do it. So that's what's really happening, because more Jews supported Jesus than opposed him, or certainly as many, if you count all the Essene community. So it was a split within the religious group, not a really, not so clearly Jesus on one side and the Jews on the other. Of course, horrible things have been done because of the way this has been interpreted. So it's always very important to understand. Master says the true castes in the world have nothing to do with race or wealth or anything. They're divisions of consciousness. those who are out for themselves, those who can live by noble principles, those who can be attuned with God. These are the true divisions in human nature, whatever time in history, whatever culture, whatever language, whatever religion. So the cohort, the armed cohort, bound Jesus and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for the people. What Caiaphas had said, it's better that one man die than that all the people be eliminated. This is the fear that the leaders felt and stoked as much as they could, which was that because Jesus had so much power, and of course we have to add, he was doing miracles, he was healing the sick, he was creating this wave of energy and interest throughout the whole land. And Caiaphas and the other priestly leaders knew that their power was subservient to the power of Caesar. They were a subservient people, and they were afraid that if Jesus created too much of a stir, that the secular authority would come down on the whole people. So Caiaphas saw Jesus as a threat. Eliminate him. Yes, one man will have to die, but all the people will be saved. So we're going to go to Caiaphas, but we already know what he thinks. It's not like we don't know what his position is. Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. Now they're following at a distance because Jesus has been arrested. Maybe they'll all be arrested. And bear in mind, this was a time, without photo images of any kind. So people did not all know each other. So Peter and another disciple are following behind to see what happens, but they're following at a distance. Because the other disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard. But Peter had to wait outside at the door. Now some people, when they talk about this, this was a disciple of Jesus, but he also was well known to the people in power. So did the people in power know that this disciple was with Jesus? Was he sort of a spy on the inside? Was he devoted to Jesus? Was he making up his mind? There's just all these little parts that make the whole story more real. Again, I mention them because when I read this story, because of all the years of experience I had with Swamiji, in the company of an exalted soul, going through so many human experiences, when I read these biblical stories, I can see them. They're not like some cartoon story where everybody is just a sort of a black and white exaggeration of human nature. It's all very much human nature. Peter and this disciple are following behind. Not everybody is allowed into Caiaphas' house, but the disciple says to Peter, look, I can get in. I'll go in, I'll see what's happening, and then I'll see if I can figure out a way to get you in, which is exactly what happens. Peter waits at the gate. The other disciple goes in. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty at the door, who was guarding the door to make sure only the right people were allowed in, and then he brought Peter in. But then the servant girl looked at Peter and said, you aren't one of that man's disciples, are you? It's like, wait a minute, who am I letting in here? How she came to that thought, who knows? But she said, wait, that's again, Peter's just about to walk in. The gatekeeper, who's the servant girl, says, aren't you one of his disciples? Peter, without even thinking, says, I am not. Just like that. The first time. First time he denies that he was a disciple of Jesus. Now, of course, it's chaos inside the courtyard. And if these other stories that I've mentioned are to be believed, it was already full of ruffians and crowded people. In several of the accounts I've read, these more esoteric accounts, they speak of drunkenness, that a lot of the men in there were drunk, that they'd been plied with drink and invited over to carry out this task by the priest. In any case, it was a raucous scene. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus replied, "I've spoken openly to the world," he said. "I taught in the synagogues or in the temples where all the Jews came together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said." So Jesus was not the slightest bit intimidated, despite the fact that he's been arrested and carried by armed soldiers and is now being held. They say, "Tell us your teachings." Jesus says, "What do you mean? I've been teaching all this time. You know exactly what I've said." When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. Now, of course, Jesus is bound, and there's all this power he's showing off in front of the authorities. Slapped him in the face and said, "Is this the way you answer the high priest? How dare you be so insolent?" Jesus replied, "If I said something wrong, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you hit me?" And then Jesus just allows that to stand. Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas. Then seizing him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance. That's a repetitious verse there from another gospel. And then some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together. Peter sat down with them. So here he is. It's the middle of the night. It's a cold night. A fire starts. Peter's trying to blend in with the group. He just goes and sits down. Once again, a servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, "This man was with the prisoner." But Peter denied it. He said, "Woman, I don't know him." So then, for the second time, Peter says no. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they did not find any. Many testified falsely against him, but their statements did not agree. This is again the chaotic scene that other sources describe, where they're sort of have these paid witnesses, but because they're trying to make it up, it doesn't quite work out. Then some stood up and gave this false testimony against Jesus. "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days will build another one not made with hands.'" But even then, their testimony did not agree. So they're caught because they're trying to do this by lawful means. They're trying not to assassinate him. They wanted the record to show that he was a danger to the people, and their action was justified. Because, of course, Jesus has power. And, of course, these people know that he has many followers, too. So they're trying to make it work. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. One of the weapons that Jesus uses in the midst of this is that he just refuses to answer. They try to persuade him. They try to persuade him by hitting him and yelling at him and trying to humiliate him and trying to goad him. But Jesus stands calmly within himself. The men who were guarding Jesus began mocking him and beating him. Imagine the karma of those people. That's why later Jesus said on the cross, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." He literally took the karma of their actions on himself. They blindfolded him and then started hitting him and said, they blindfolded him and then hit him and then said, "Prophet, who hit you? If you are so powerful and have this, then we're going to beat you in the dark and you need to say who." Just an evil madness takes over people sometimes. And they said many other insulting things to him. After a little while, those standing around in the courtyard went up to Peter, and one of them said, "Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away." And one of the high priest's servants, who was a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off and then Jesus had healed, said, "Didn't I see you with him in the garden?" And then Peter replied, and he called down curses upon them and said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And that was the third time. And just as he was speaking these words, the rooster crowed. And at that moment, Jesus turned and looked right at Peter. Then Peter remembered what Jesus had said to him during the course of the Last Supper. Seemingly it had gone out of his mind until this moment. "Before the rooster crows today, you will swear 3 times that you don't even know me." Then Peter ran from the place and went outside and wept bitterly. Oh my God, can you see it? Just like this. He'd been so full of bravado. He'd pulled up his sword. He'd attacked the man who was arresting Jesus. Then he got so caught up in the terror of what was happening that 3 times he said he didn't even know him. Now, it's a heartbreaking story. And Peter brought himself around and behaved magnificently afterwards. It's heartbreaking, and in a peculiar way, it's also heartening, because it tells us that even to the best of us, we have moments of weakness. But all we have to do is repudiate them and go forward. Later, you'll see when Jesus is resurrected, he gives Peter 3 opportunities to affirm his love for him, to balance the karma. At daybreak, the council of the elders of the people, both the chief priests and the teachers of the law, this is the 71 of the Sanhedrin, met together, and Jesus was led before them. They said to him, "If you are the Messiah, tell us." They were all waiting for the Messiah, so they wanted Jesus to tell them who he was. Jesus answered, "If I tell you, you will not believe me, and if I asked you, you would not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the mighty Lord." And they all asked, "Are you then the Son of God?" He replied, "You say that I am." Then they said, "Why do we need any more testimony? We have heard it from his own lips." Early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people made their plans about how they would have Jesus executed. So, when Judas, now we go back to Judas for a moment. When Judas, who had betrayed Jesus, saw that Jesus was now to be condemned, Judas was seized with remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. "I have sinned, for I have betrayed innocent blood." And the priest said, "Oh, what's that to us? That's your responsibility." I mean, now, just picture, again, all of us have times of remorse when we realize that in some profound way we have failed to live up to our own aspirations. And perhaps we have caused great harm or hardship to people. So right here in this story, we have Peter, and now we have Judas. And both of them repudiated their wrong behavior and redeemed themselves, because God never stops loving us, and he never stops working for our salvation, even if we work against our own cause. So Judas threw the money into the temple because none of the priests would take it back in their own hands. So he threw it into the temple and left. Then he went away and hanged himself. He just felt he had to compensate. I've shed innocent blood, so I will now sacrifice my own life as a way of balancing the scale. The chief priests picked up the coins and said, "It is against the law to put this money into the treasury, since it is blood money." Blood money, money given for the shedding of blood. So they decided to use the money to buy the potter's field as a burial plot for paupers. That is why it has been called the field of blood to this day. Then what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. They took the 30 pieces of silver, the price set on him by the people of Israel, and they used them to buy the potter's field, as the Lord commanded. These are like all the different ways that the Old Testament finds itself expressed in the New Testament. Now we're going to stop reading from the Bible for a moment, and we're going to look at pictures. Some of them are artistic renderings of the events described, and some of it we're going to go back to our story here where we move from place to place, the places that still exist that show us, the scene where these things happen and give us the opportunity to feel the vibrations that are still there. So this is number 46, Galakantu. Galakantu means the cry of the rooster. So this church is outside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem, not too far outside the walls, but it's on a hill there. And it is built on the site of Caiaphas. It's Caiaphas's house. And it's a multi-leveled church. You walk in from the street, you walk downstairs to the middle, and way underneath, where we'll go in pictures, there are dungeons. And it's believed that Jesus was held in one or more of those prison cells during this long night when he's at Caiaphas's house before the next thing that happens. He's going to be taken to Pilate, who's the Roman authority. The Sanhedrin has condemned him. Now they have to take him to Pilate because they're not able to execute him themselves. So this is the scene where Peter's denial took place. So this is the church. You can see it's a beautiful edifice. And we'll come closer. Let's look at the next picture. Can you see, and you can see the hills of Jerusalem behind it. I believe the walled city is a little to the right. If you look closely on the very top above the cross, there's a rooster, because that's what the church is named for. So go closer and we'll see that. There it is. So of course you could see before it's quite small, but that's how it's commemorated, what happened in this place. Let's see now, this is a piece of art that's close to the entry door. Christ imprisoned Peter, his disciple. Let's go. Now we're looking at a painting. This is Jesus being challenged by the high priest. His wrists are bound. He's being held a prisoner, but the priest is arguing with him. He's wanting him to acknowledge, what he has done. So now we go into this is the middle level chapel. There's a chapel above this one, and then below, as I'm going to show you, there's the prison cells. And you see the little area in the left corner where you see that little fence. What that is actually, it's a window down into the prison cells that are below. We'll actually go down there with photographs, but not everyone can climb the stairs, and so they look from that point of view. So let's go to the next. And this is the first level of the prison cells. I had very profound experiences in these cells. These were some of my favorite places there. Let's show you the next. Just these are caves underneath. I've always had a deep samskar of being imprisoned and to a certain extent a fear of it. So when we went into some of these prison cells, let's go down one more level here, down into these dungeons. I tried, as pilgrimage gives you the opportunity, to seriously and deeply confront that fear. And I think because of the power of Jesus that permeated the place, I was more courageous than I have been in the past. So let's now go down one more level. So you can see that the stairs, of course, were put in. This is variously, some people think this was like a window that the officers could look down deeper into the cell, or where they could pass food down. Let's go down to the lowest dungeon. This is the place that they call the sacred pit, because it is believed that this is where Jesus was held. And it can only be said that it's extraordinarily powerful there, and they have the Bible open to the passages that describe this period of time in the life of Christ. And when you go to Jerusalem, you can go to this church, you can walk down these stairs, you can sit with your back against the stone wall and imagine that extraordinary night where Jesus would be put in this imprisoned cell and then dragged up to be interrogated and perhaps put here to be abused by the guards, and all of it being, you would be in perfect blackness when you were down in that pit. So now we'll go back upstairs and outside. This is a piece of art with Peter with his arms outstretched and the statue of the woman next to him being the servant girl speaking to Peter, "Aren't you one of his?" And Peter just, you can see, it's a gesture that you do when you say, like, "What are you talking about?" You raise up your arms like, "I don't know what you're talking about." That's what this is supposed to represent, is that moment when Peter said, "I don't know." Now, the next picture here, let's look at it. These are stone steps. This Gallicantu church is up on a hill, and the Garden of Gethsemane is on a nearby hill, but there's a valley in between. And of course, Jesus was arrested at the Garden of Gethsemane, and then he was escorted by the armed guards to this place, and then he walked up these stairs. And it is believed that these are the same stones. And if they're not the same stones, it is believed that Jesus himself, escorted by the armed guards, walking up to confront the priestly power, knowing, Jesus himself knowing where this was going and where it would end. So while we sort of feel the power of Jesus passing through this moment, let's listen to Swamiji sing this beautiful chant of Masters in the Valley of Sorrow.
In the valley of sorrow 1,000 years or till tomorrow. In the valley of sorrow 1,000 years or till tomorrow. But I'll wait just for you, just you. My Lord, I want to see only you, just you. My heart's aflame, my soul is afire. My heart's aflame, my soul is afire. Just for you, just you. My Lord, I want to see only you, just you. In the valley of sorrow 1,000 years or till tomorrow. In the valley of sorrow 1,000 years or till tomorrow. But I'll wait just for you, just you. My Lord, I want to see only you, just you. My heart's aflame, my soul is afire. My heart's aflame, my soul is afire. Just for you. Just you. My Lord, I want to see only you, just you. In the valley of sorrow, 1,000 years or till tomorrow. In the valley of sorrow, 1,000 years or till tomorrow. But I'll wait just for you, just you. My Lord, I want to see only just you. My heart's aflame, my soul is afire. My heart's aflame, my soul is afire, just for you, just you. My Lord, I want to see only you, just you. In the valley of sorrow, 1,000 years or till tomorrow. In the valley of sorrow, 1,000 years or till tomorrow. But I'll wait just for you, just you. My Lord, I want to see only you, just you. My heart's aflame, my soul is afire. My heart's aflame, my soul is afire, just for you, just you. My Lord, I want to see only you, just you. In the valley of sorrow, 1,000 years or till tomorrow. In the valley of sorrow, 1,000 years or till tomorrow. But I'll wait just for you, just you. My Lord, I want to see only you, just you.
Okay, my friends. So now what happens is that the religious authority has made their decision, and now they have to get the secular authority to agree. Pontius Pilate was the ruler, the Roman appointed ruler. So they bound Jesus up, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, who was the governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. There were so many rules, of course, for cleanliness and corruption and so on. So now that it was going to be this holiday, they had to avoid being in any non-holy place. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you," which was not an answer, but that's how they answered him. And they began to accuse Jesus, saying, "We have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be the Messiah, a king. Pilate said, see, they're trying to make him seem like he's a threat to the secular authority. He declares himself a king. He opposes paying taxes. Now, in fact, when they asked him that, that was the famous answer he asked to see. They asked him, do we pay taxes? And Jesus said, well, give me a coin. And they gave him a coin, and Caesar's picture was on it. So that was when Jesus said, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, meaning these coins belong to Caesar. Jesus was being very careful, because he knew full well what they were trying to do. They were trying to find grounds for having him to be declared a threat to secular authority, to subverting secular authority, because the secular authority was very nervous because there were many zealots among the Jews who were in favor of violent overthrow of the ruling authority. And in fact, 70 years later, there was a revolution which was completely put down, and the whole temple was destroyed, and the Jewish people were dispersed. And that threat was always in the air, so the religious authorities were trying to capitalize on the secular power's fear of that. So they're trying to see, this is one of those revolutionaries who's going to come in the night and slit your throat. You need to get him first. That's what they're trying to say. Pilate said, but take him yourselves and judge him by your own law. What do I care if he says he's the Jewish Messiah or not? That means nothing to me. But they objected, saying, but we have no right to execute anyone. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. So they said, yes, we can judge him guilty, but you have taken away from us the power of execution. Only you can execute him, and we want him to be executed. We want you to understand this man should die. Pilate then went back inside the palace where Jesus was, and he summoned Jesus and asked him, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus answered, is that your own idea to ask me that? Or did others talk to you about me? Because Jesus knew full well what was going on. Why would it occur to Pilate that he was the king of the Jews? And Pilate replied, am I a Jew? Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done? Why are they so anxious about you? Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest. But now my kingdom is from another place. Then Pilate said, so you are a king? And Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me, hears my voice, and listens to me. Esther said that's an esoteric reference to hearing the Om vibration. Those who are in tune with Jesus hear his true voice, which is the voice of the cosmos. And then Pilate retorts, what is truth? With this, he went out again to those gathered outside and said, I find no basis for this charge against him. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, Jesus gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him again to Jesus, don't you hear the testimony that they are bringing against you? But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of Pilate. I mean, Pilate has this absolute authority, and he's accustomed to not only being respected, but to being feared. And this rabid crowd of people has brought him bound as a prisoner, presented him to Pilate, demanded his execution. And Jesus is not defending himself, and you can well imagine not appearing even slightly concerned, but completely strong within himself. And no matter how much goes back and forth, Jesus is not pleading for his life. He's not arguing his case. He's just standing there in silence. Pilate simply didn't know what to make of this. But the priests insisted. He stirs up the people all over Judea by his teaching. He started in Galilee and has come all the way here. On hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. When he learned that he was a Galilean, that meant that Herod had jurisdiction over him. And Pontius Pilate was anxious not to have to make this decision. And as it happened, Herod was in Jerusalem. So he sent Jesus to Herod, who was there at the time. So when Herod saw Jesus, and now picture it again, Jesus has been arrested from the Garden of Gethsemane, dragged to Caiaphas' place, abused by the priests, insulted and physically abused. Now they drag him to Pilate. Pilate is trying to help Jesus to get free. The priests again, the crowds are moving with them. Everyone is shouting, trying to persuade. Jesus is silently watching it, so they bind him and take him over now to Herod. Pilate's trying to pass the buck. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased, because for a long time he'd been wanting to meet him, because of course he'd heard about him in Galilee. From what he had heard about him, he hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. He wanted to see a miracle. He plied Jesus with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there vehemently accusing Jesus. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked Jesus. Dressing him in an elegant robe, they sent him back to Pilate. You know, here is the king of the Jews. We've dressed him all up. You know, it's just, they're just playing with him like a toy. You know, they have all this power and they're trying to make this happen. There's an odd line in the Bible. That day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Before that, they had been enemies. You know, the uplifting influence of their relationship to Jesus, who knows? But there it is. I've read it many times, and every time I read it, I think, how odd. Much could be said, but we'll move on. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him a message. She said, "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." Now this is a little subplot that some esoteric teachings then take much further. Some say that Pilate's wife was actually a disciple of Jesus. Others say that she just was aware of his power, and she was terribly frightened that her husband would bear the great sin of putting this man to death. So she sends this message, whatever you do, do not harm this man. So now Pilate is, not only does he have his own concerns about what's going on here, now he has the pleading of his wife that this is very dangerous, don't touch this. So Pilate calls them all together, the priests and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was inciting the people to rebellion. I have examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us, as you can see. He has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I will punish him and then release him." Now it was the custom at the festival of the Passover to release a prisoner whom the people requested to release. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists, because this rebellion was always popping up here and there, who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. "Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" Pilate asked, knowing it was out of self-interest that the chief priests had handed him over. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd, and that's one of the biblical references to the fact that this crowd was being manipulated by those who had an agenda here. the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. They shouted back, "Not him, not him, give us Barabbas." And the whole crowd shouted, "Away with this man, release Barabbas to us." Which of the two do you want me to release? Pilate asked again. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus?" Pilate said, "who is called the Messiah?" They all answered, "Crucify him." None of this is happening on the realm of reason. "Why?" Pilate asked. "What crime has he committed?" But they shouted all the louder. You see, Pilate asks a question, and what do? They shout all the louder. "Crucify him." Wanting to release Jesus, Pilate again appealed to them, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him, crucify him." We have seen in modern times how crowds can be stirred to great unreason, and how the technique of doing it is to get the chant going, "Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him." So these people are shouting, drunken, paid off, who knows. For the third time, Pilate spoke to them. "Why? What crime has this man committed? I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore I will have him punished and release him." But with loud shouts they insistently demanded that he be crucified. And in the end their shouts prevailed. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and pressed it onto his head. They put a staff in his right hand. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. Then they spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. This, terrible crimes against this innocent man. And Jesus, who had all the power of the universe at his command, bear in mind, when they came to arrest him, he merely stepped forward to be arrested, and the force of his consciousness was so great he knocked the people to the ground. So as he says, "Even now, legions of angels could rescue me." Once more Pilate came out and said to those gathered, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." He was hoping that if he'd been tortured and humiliated, that would be enough. When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests saw him, they shouted, "Crucify, crucify." And Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for doing so." But the leaders insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God. Blasphemy must be punished with death." When Pilate heard this, he was more afraid. This man claims to be God, and I'm going to be responsible for killing him. And he went back inside the palace and said to Jesus, "Where do you come from?" But Jesus refused to answer. And Pilate said, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Don't you realize I have the power either to free you or to crucify you?" You see, in Pilate's mind, and this again, this is this whole story, because Jesus had no fear. Everything that man fears, worst of all, physical pain, humiliation, torture, imprisonment, terrible death. Jesus did not lift a finger to prevent these things from coming down upon him. And Pilate is horrified, because he can see this man is neither mad nor a weakling. This is a powerful being who is breaking every expectation that Pilate has about how everyone behaves in front of him. So he says, "Don't you understand what's at stake here?" And then Jesus speaks finally. you would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a far greater sin. Now this beautiful line, you would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. This actually describes the life of all of us. Everything that we think is being done to us by some human force, everything is given to us by God. Nothing in this world would happen except by the hand of God. Imagine if we were able to truly and deeply hold that thought. We would be like Christ himself. Why would we ever be afraid? From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the crowd kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement. It was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. "Here is your king," Pilate said. And they shouted, "Take him away! Take him away! Crucify him!" "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. And the crowd and the priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, a riot was beginning to form because of all that was going on, he took a pitcher of water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." This is one of these, classic scenes. Pilate tries to wash his hands, dramatically washes his hands. "His blood is not on my hands, it's on yours." And the people answered, "His blood is on us and on our children." You can see what madness has descended. So Pilate decided to grant their demand. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, the one they asked for, and surrendered Jesus to their will. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put Jesus' own clothes back on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. And carrying his own cross, he went out. Now, we're going to now go and just look at a few pictures that relate to the places and some little bit of art that helps us understand where we are. So this is, obviously, this is an artistic rendition of Jesus before Pilate. Pilate back there in the white robe looking at him. Jesus opening his hands in innocence. Of course, these are extraordinarily classic scenes that have been presented over and over again in art. People trying to penetrate artistically the feeling for what the scene must have been. So that's the first. Let's just look at another. Jesus being dressed with a robe and with the crown of thorns on his head, and they're tormenting him and mocking him. Once again, Jesus being mocked. The man, of course, on the right of the picture, you sort of see the classic face of a ruffian tormenting him. Yet another picture. The artists, of course, bring all this light into the light of Christ. They're somewhat graphic, but you also get the picture that this was a man in a physical body being brutally, physically mistreated. One more. Once again. And you can see also the consciousness of the people who were tormenting him. I remember once when we were in a very difficult situation, actually in the course of litigation, and we were in the courtroom. And I'm not given to seeing things. I don't have any visions. But that day, I almost saw these demons just running around that courtyard, shouting and screaming. I mentioned it to Swami later, and he just said yes. Just like this sort of dark energy gets unleashed, and then human beings who are in tune with it begin to act as its instrument. And then there's one more picture.
Some men call it progress, down with those who doubt. To join the causes others join, and shout when others shout. Come, you're a man, no passive stone. Stand up and call your soul your own. Go on alone, go on alone. Banish weakness, go on alone. Go on alone, go on alone. Don't look back, just go on alone. Some men lack the daring ever to be free. They shun the heights and cloud the depths and court security. Come, you're a man, no passive stone. Stand up and call your soul your own. Go on alone, go on alone. Banish weakness, go on alone. Go on alone, go on alone. Don't look back, just go on alone. Cowards see but pride in singularity. Oh, never mind if men are wrong, so long as they agree. Come, you're a man, no passive stone. Stand up and call your soul your own. Go on alone, go on alone. Banish weakness, go on alone. Go on alone, go on alone. Don't look back, just go on alone. The power within you, error to defy. The world may change or disappear, but truth can never die. Come, you're a man, no passive stone. Stand up and call your soul your own. Go on alone, go on alone. Banish weakness, go on alone. Go on alone, go on alone. Don't look back, just go on alone.
What happens now? I mean, where we are in the story of the Bible, he's been condemned by Pilate. He's going to be crucified, and as the Bible, the last lines are the Bible, they hand him his cross. And now, where all of this was taking place at the time, the city of Jerusalem is now grown around the places where this was happening, but it was not yet as developed as it is now. Let me try to get this clear for a moment. So they were leading Jesus, over open fields and open countrysides to the place where Pilate condemned him. And then Jesus had to carry the cross from that place of condemnation to the hill called Golgotha, which is where he was crucified, which was outside the city. It was a public place, but it was outside the city. And the route that Jesus had to walk from being condemned by Pilate to where he was finally crucified is what they call the Via Dolorosa, the way of sorrows. the road of sorrow. Now that route goes right through Old Jerusalem. And when people go there as pilgrims, you go in through what's called the Lion's Gate, which is just because it's one of the gates into the city of Jerusalem, and there's some carving that looks like a lion. So they call it the Lion's Gate. And so you come in through the Lion's Gate, and then you walk this route through the city of Jerusalem, and the significant events of that walk are marked. So how this happened was, of course, at the time, Jesus was condemned, and then he had to walk this distance to where he was stripped of his clothes, nailed to the cross. The cross was raised, and for a number of hours he was on the cross, and then he died. He was taken down from the cross, his body was anointed, he was placed into a tomb. And he lay in the tomb for 3 days. A rock was put over it, and on the morning of the third day, after the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene ran to the tomb. The rock had been removed, the tomb was empty, and she saw Jesus resurrected. So that's the drama that's taking place over what we now call Easter. There were a few people who stayed with Jesus through this whole cycle, and one of them was his mother Mary, and Mary Magdalene, a group of women from Jerusalem, a few of the disciples. John was with Mary at the foot of the cross. It seems most likely that many others were nearby, sort of observing and watching and waiting to see what happened. It is said, these are the more esoteric sources, that after Jesus was crucified and Mary lived on for about 20 more years, that she created in the garden of where she lived a replica of this walk that Jesus did, carrying the cross from his place of condemnation to his place of crucifixion and anointing, and then placed in the tomb from which he was resurrected. And so the significant events of that time, it is said, it became one of the ways in which the disciples of Christ, led by Mary, because Mary was a tremendous influence after Jesus died, as we get to it, and of course many people know all of these stories. The disciple John, who's the author of the book of John, who calls himself the one whom Jesus loved, that John was standing with Mary at the base of the cross, and one of the very last, in fact, the last thing that Jesus did was he said to John, "Behold your mother," and to Mary, "Behold your son." And from that day, John made a home for Mary in his home and took care of her. And then it's also said in the more esoteric sources that Mary became the center point of the life of all the disciples because of her spiritual greatness and her attunement with Jesus and everything, of course. And so the fact that she made a devotional exercise of reenacting these final hours of the life of Jesus and his death, and then of course the resurrection, that became a holy practice for all of them. And you can easily see how magnificent it could be. Now, over time, and at a certain point, the Franciscans created their own way of doing the Stations of the Cross. There's 14 stations, just points, notable incidents from condemnation to being placed in the tomb, because that's the cross. The resurrection is something else. And of course, you can take that whole experience of the Via Dolorosa, which is the way of sorrows. You can either take it as heartbreakingly sad, or you can take it as breathtakingly triumphant. And so there are many different prayers and ways of doing it. One of the ways is with each step to feel how much he was suffering. And the other way to take it is to see with each step what a triumph of spirit over matter. And you can well imagine that that's the way that we would rather do it. And the Franciscans have prayers for each of the stations that are all based on triumph and courage. So it's I don't, of course, not being Catholic, I don't follow any of these. But when you are in Jerusalem and you can walk from where he was condemned to where he was crucified and resurrected, and you have to go through the bazaars and all of that to the city, and you finally end up at the church, what's called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Holy Sepulchre is the tomb. And it was a barren hillside. Now it's this church that it's in itself hundreds of years old. And what was a cave has now been, a chapel has been built over it, and then a giant church has been built over that. But it's all within one building where Jesus was crucified. I'm raising my hand because you walk up these stairs. This is where he was crucified. You come down those stairs. This is where his body was laid out to be anointed. You walk a very short distance. This is where his body was set in the tomb. And it's all just right in one place. And when we would go there, have gone there, if you get up very early in the morning, if you get up at 5 or in the morning, all the stores are shuttered, and all the shoppers and the people who just live their life in Jerusalem, it's too early for all of that to have begun. So you can go physically from place to place, and it's all, there's a circular iron place marking physically where they believe each of the positions took place. And there's beautiful sculpture, small sculpture on the wall that also describe each of these events. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start tonight, I think we can, yes, I think we can, the Stations of the Cross with walking with Jesus. And so the first station of the cross is what we just read, which is where Jesus is condemned. That's the first station. The second is when the cross is placed on his shoulders. So now we're going to, again, look at pictures of the places that you would see if you went there now. And a few paintings, of course. And God willing, we'll all walk there again. This is a Franciscan monastery that is built on what is said to be the site of where Pontius Pilate had his governor's palace. And you can see that the dark circle there, that has a Roman numeral 1, and above it is these sculptures. Unfortunately, I wasn't able, I didn't think at the time to have someone take really good photographs of each of these, but you can see a little bit of how nice they are. When we go back, I'll try to get very good pictures of this. So let's go inside the monastery gate, and this is just a lovely artist's picture of them picking up the cross, bringing the condemned Jesus down, and placing it upon his shoulders before sending him out on his trek to Golgotha. And then let's see the next. And this is inside the monastery gardens, and that little chapel has the unappealing name of the Chapel of the Flagellation, which is where Jesus was taken and whipped and tortured. And then, well, let's go inside. It's a small chapel, and actually it has a very powerful vibration, but of course, as you can well imagine, quite serious. Let's go a little closer. Each of those stained glass, of course, has a scene, and the circle above, which in so many churches, you see something that looks like the spiritual eye, which of course is what you're looking at there. But the circle around is the thorns. It's the crown of thorns. So it's extremely beautiful and powerful symbol. Okay, let's see the next picture. This is in one of the churches. They had all the stations of the cross illustrated, and we'll come back to these. So this is the first station of the cross, when the cross is placed on Jesus' shoulder. Then we'll see it again. This is Fra Angelico's picture of Jesus carrying his cross with Mary, and the founder of the order that Fra Angelico was in, also there, bowing at his feet. Let's see the next one. This is Heinrich Hoffmann's drawing of Jesus carrying his cross through the streets of Jerusalem. Here we see, far more of the both the devotee on the right weeping, and then the ruffians with the stick driving him along. And this last picture is an El Greco painting of Jesus carrying his cross. And this will be our last image. And while we look at this image, we're going to play Swami's song from the oratorio, which he wrote for Jesus making this walk down the Via Dolorosa. And it's the song, Thy Will Be Done. And this will be the end of our class.
Nothing of man endures wonder or scorn. Birth, life, and death are one. Veils of thy love, thy will, thy